Many consider it to be one of the best cities to live in the entire United States. Not only that, the city of the iconic Golden Gate Bridge is also considered one of the best cities in the world for young people to work and prosper. And what can I tell you? I'm sure you're not surprised. After all, in addition to having a very strong technology sector, this city is also right next to Silicon Valley, the largest technology hub on the planet. It also has a world-class financial center. So it's no wonder that the San Francisco Bay Area ranks as one of the richest metropolitan areas with one of the highest concentrations of millionaires in the world. In fact, the city alone, excluding its metropolitan area, has a GDP of more than $200 billion. To put that in perspective, it's equivalent to the entire economy of a country like Greece. Not bad. With all these points, we could almost come to think of San Francisco as something of a dream location, couldn't we? Well, VisualPolitik viewers, nothing could be further from the truth. If that were the case, we wouldn't be making this video. It's true, San Francisco has a lot to offer, but for a few years now, the city has been losing its appeal. And pay attention, because there are many people who fear that it could be following the same path that Detroit once took towards the abyss. So the question is, what exactly are the problems that are hounding this city? How is it possible that San Francisco seems to be following the same footsteps as Detroit? In this video, we're going to answer all of these questions, but first, let's look at some history.
Raised by trends.
Founded in 1776 by Spanish settlers who built a mission in the Bay, the San Francisco Mission, in honor of St. Francis of Assisi, the enclave began to prosper in the early 19th century under the name of Yerba Buena. However, when the United States took it from Mexico in 1846, it was renamed San Francisco again. Nevertheless, it remained a small town without much apparent interest until gold was struck. The gold rush took San Francisco's population from 1,000 in 1848 to more than 25,000 in just over a year. This was the city's first major boom. The second came with World War II. One of the largest bases of the Pacific Fleet was established here, and that brought with it a huge industry linked to the supply of ammunition and equipment for the Navy. Later, of course, the third major takeoff had to do with the dot-com revolution at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. With Silicon Valley just a stone's throw away, San Francisco naturally became a major city of reference for investors, engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs from all over the world. Likewise, over recent decades, San Francisco, a metropolitan area with almost 5 million inhabitants, has been the cradle of great social movements, such as the protests against the Vietnam War, the famous hippie movement, or the struggles for the rights of minorities, especially those of LGBTQ+ people. In other words, San Francisco has been and continues to be one of the richest and most influential cities in the world, economically, politically, socially, and culturally.
San Francisco is a mad city inhabited for the most part by perfectly insane people. Rudyard Kipling in American Notes, 1891.
Nevertheless, this great success story is currently on the ropes. San Francisco's image is deteriorating at full speed, and the question is, why? What on earth is going on in the crazy city by the bay? Well, we're going to take a look at that right now.
San Francisco, the real Gotham City.
It's no secret that, as a general rule, considerably more crime is committed in large cities than in small urban or rural settings. And San Francisco is certainly no different, nor has it ever been. For example, during the gold rush between the years 1850 and 1856, 1,400 murders took place in the city. Even in 1975, in this very city, there was an assassination attempt against the then president, Gerald Ford. However, the last few years have been, or are rather proving to be, crazy. For example, between 2014 and 2017, non-violent robbery cases more than doubled to almost 75,000. Let's just say that the aftermath of the Great Crisis of 2008 was very hard for this city. Then things started to improve, but since 2020, crime has skyrocketed again. And no, it wasn't because of the pandemic, but because of a new political strategy. The strategy of former San Francisco District Attorney Chesa Boudin. Since his election in 2020, Boudin promised to be more flexible with those who committed minor and non-violent offences. In other words, basically, a free hand was given and the result was a real disaster. Suddenly, the citizens of San Francisco found themselves with a prosecutor who would allow repeat offenders to return to the streets without a penalty. For instance, a person could be caught red-handed committing a misdemeanor, have an extensive record, and yet be sure that, thanks to Boudin, absolutely nothing would happen to him or her. Within a few hours, the person would be completely free. And the question I'm sure many of you are asking yourselves is, what on earth was this prosecutor thinking? Well, among other things, he was thinking this.
A significant percentage of people selling drugs in San Francisco are here from Honduras. We need to be mindful about the impact our interventions have. Some of these young men have been trafficked here under pain of death. Some of them have had family members in Honduras who have been or will be harmed if they don't continue to pay off traffickers. Boudin in a 2020 virtual town hall meeting.
The idea was to facilitate reintegration and relieve the pressure on the prison system. The problem is that the scheme did not have sufficient resources and the strategy was not well implemented. The situation became so out of control that in 2022, it was estimated that San Francisco citizens had a 1 in 16 chance of experiencing a violent or property crime. And that has led to news stories like this one.
San Francisco crime crisis in spotlight after Whole Foods closure.
Indeed, the lack of security crisis that the city has been experiencing has even forced stores to modify their opening hours to avoid robberies, or, as in the case of the Whole Foods supermarket chain, to close down one of its flagship stores. In fact, since its opening in March 2022, robberies at the establishment were so frequent that the business became unprofitable. Of course, lack of security was not the only problem Whole Foods cited as a reason for closing. There was another problem. Any ideas what it might have been? Well, listen up.
Epidemic with no virus?
There are no longer restrictions on entry into the United States for people not vaccinated against the COVID-19. This virus is certainly nothing like it was in 2020 and 2021. But what if I told you that the United States is now suffering from its own epidemic? And I know what you're thinking. Please, no more diseases. Give us a break, Grant. But relax, we're not going to tell you about any virus right now. What is plaguing the entire country, and San Francisco in particular, is a very unusual epidemic. The drug epidemic, and more specifically, the opioid epidemic. As I'm sure many of you already know, opioids are drugs derived from the opium poppy. Many of them are used as pharmaceuticals. Oxycodone or morphine are the clearest examples. Both are used to treat all kinds of pain, but unfortunately, they have also fallen into the black market and have become the root of serious addiction problems. But it is neither oxycodone or morphine that is creating the chaos right now. Instead, it is another drug that many of you, I'm sure, have heard of in recent times: fentanyl. Developed in 1959 and introduced into the United States in 1960 as an intravenous anesthetic, fentanyl has been a drug commonly used by physicians to relieve pain after surgery as a result of pathologies such as cancer. However, this drug, which is 50 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine, eventually made it to the streets, creating a new boom around 2011 when, being an infinitely cheaper option than heroin, it began to gain market share. The problem is that it is also much more deadly. To give you an idea, in the first 2 years on the black market between 2011 and 2012, fentanyl caused the overdose deaths of 5,200 people. And according to CDC data in 2022, more than 70,000 people were victims of this drug that is commonly mixed with other drugs such as methamphetamine. VisualPolitik viewers, the abuse of opioids and especially fentanyl has caused a huge crisis with tens and tens of thousands of victims and a multi-billion-dollar economic impact.
Opioid crisis cost U.S. nearly $1.5 trillion in 2020, congressional report.
In 2020 alone, 7% of GDP. That is insane. That is why the Biden administration has begun to take action. You see, this drug is not produced domestically, but it is manufactured with chemicals brought in from China by Mexican cartels, who then smuggle it into the United States. We are talking about the Sinaloa cartel in particular. Well, the Biden administration has already asked China to be stricter and have more control over its chemical exports, while working to increase cooperation with Mexico. So, how do you think both countries have reacted? Well, for now, China has pledged to help the United States. However, it does not seem to be delivering what it's promised. In fact, most analysts are certain that China has a vested interest in this epidemic not ending. And what about Mexico? AMLO is surely complying, isn't he? Well, unfortunately, he prefers to throw his hands up in the air. Take a look at this.
Mexican president blames U.S. fentanyl crisis on lack of hugs among families. Andrés Manuel López Obrador cites a lack of hugs and embraces for 70,000 annual overdose deaths attributed to synthetic opioid.
The situation is devastating throughout the United States and particularly in San Francisco. The Bay City is one of the hardest hit cities. Check this out. And yes, as you are probably imagining, fentanyl is the biggest culprit in this tragedy. To be precise, the substance was to blame for 7 out of 10 fatalities. As it stands, things are not getting any better.
Overdose deaths in San Francisco hit 200 in 3 months, a crying shame. The 41% spike comes as the city closed an outreach center that stocked Narcan and allowed supervised drug use.
In fact, remember the supermarket that closed in San Francisco because of lack of security? Well, in September 2022, a person was found dead from fentanyl and methamphetamine in the restrooms, and the entrance was always crowded with people using these substances. So you see, both the lack of security and narcotics are causing what has been called by many the most beautiful city in America to sink into a dark abyss. But do you think we're done? Well, not at all. Check this out.
The urban exodus.
If you live in a big city like Madrid, Chicago, Rome, or Paris, you might have noticed that rents are sky high. Yet according to the World Economic Forum, none of these 4 cities are among the most expensive cities in which to live. So do you know which one is in the top 10? Yes, indeed, it's San Francisco. And you may ask, why is that? Well, mainly due to one problem in particular, the high cost of housing. It stands to reason that high housing prices do not come out of nowhere. They usually occur because supply is much lower than demand. And this is certainly the case in San Francisco. For example, the city of Austin, Texas, which has a similar population to San Francisco, has built 133,000 new homes since 2010. Do you know how many have been built in the city by the Bay? A mere 37,500. As you can imagine, this has caused both rents and house prices to skyrocket. And the situation has reached such a critical point that it is already affecting the productive fabric of the city itself. In the case of San Francisco, only 1 home has been built for every 8 new jobs created in the last decade. And with offices, much the same has happened. And if you thought the situation couldn't get any worse, the COVID-19 pandemic has turned the city's economy upside down. Why? For one simple reason: remote working.
San Francisco more than doubles its estimate of permanent remote work.
Indeed, high office prices have made working from home fashionable in San Francisco since 2020. Some estimates suggest that right now around 25% of the city's offices could be vacant. And do you know what this is causing? Well, for one thing, the streets are getting emptier and emptier, which is causing some stores and restaurants that used to survive off of office workers to close down. On the other hand, imagine that you were suddenly offered working from home. Would you stay in a city where the rent consumes almost all of your income? Maybe some of you would for certain reasons, but I'm sure that many of you would move somewhere cheaper. Well, this is exactly what is also happening in San Francisco. Many professionals are moving to other cities and even to other states. But it's not only workers who are trying to leave. Many companies are also considering the same idea. You see, remote working, high rental costs, along with being the second most expensive in the country, are combined with one other crucial factor for companies: the tax burden. 59% of executives in San Francisco's technology industries consider both city and state taxes and regulations to be excessive, yet they continue to increase. So San Francisco is also facing a growing exodus of people and companies. It is still in its infancy, but the risk is on the table. And that's what explains news items like this one.
This is SF's plan to cut through red tape and get 82,000 housing units built.
Lack of security, drugs, and high living costs seem to be putting San Francisco on a line of old glories like Detroit or San Jose. Of course, they are not about to give up so soon. The city government has already enlisted the support of California Governor Gavin Newsom to deploy a drug task force. In addition, the citizens of San Francisco have already replaced the disastrous Boudin with Brooke Jenkins, a new and much tougher district attorney. Not only that, it also has the support of the Biden administration, which has presented the National Drug Control Strategy. Be that as it may, it seems clear that San Francisco is not at its best, and the question is, do you think the new DA will succeed in improving the safety of the city? How could San Francisco deal with the fentanyl epidemic? Should the federal government intervene? You can leave me your answers in the comments below. As always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every single week. So subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell button down there so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it, so we know. All the best, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.